everyone. Welcome to the Self-Awareness Journey podcast. I'm Melissa Albers.
And I'm JJ Parker. This podcast is for seekers, seekers of happiness and joy, seekers of a centered approach to success in life, seekers of their true, authentic selves.
Get ready for some real talk on everything from anxiety, emotions, and habits to love, compassion, and forgiveness. We know you'll be challenged and enlightened by this conversation. We're so glad you're here. Let's dive in.
One of our favorite listeners sent us a little clip on Facebook.
Yeah.
From Simon Sinek, who I love.
Me too.
And this may be part of his podcast or something. I guess I should have looked into it a little bit more.
Yeah, he has a podcast on optimism. Simon does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's a guy, I don't want to spin off on this, but Simon Sinek has come out with just the greatest things ever, and he keeps reinventing himself with more great things.
Yeah.
He's so cool.
What's so interesting about him and some of these other thought leaders are Simon was very famous for the start with why model.
Right, exactly.
Like figure out why you do what you do.
Yeah.
And then everything from there becomes easier or clearer about your actions and your thinking and your behaviors.
Right.
Which I love. I spent a lot of time with that
so
start
did
with
I.
why curriculum.
I think a lot of us did.
But he does a really great job. He's got another book about leadership called Leaders Eat Last, which is great. And then he's got all of this, he keeps evolving this content, but he's so good at making really complicated things extremely simple.
It is his superpower.
Yeah.
It is his superpower. He's an amazing speaker and articulate and so fun to listen to. If anybody's interested, by the way, his name is Simon Sinek, and it's Sinek is how you spell his last name. You can't miss him if you just Google him once. You can't miss it. But anyway, okay.
So this clip, our listener just said, hey, I'd like your Melissa's thoughts on this clip. And what they were talking about was validation.
Yeah.
And I think validation's really interesting because it's something we all seek all the time.
Right. I talk about validation in coaching constantly.
So just to put a frame around it, what validation means, I'd like to ask you what you think validation means, or how it comes to you. But it's just like an affirmation of your thoughts, like your thoughts and your feelings. An affirmation of yourself. Yeah, affirmation of self in whatever iteration that might be, emotional, spiritual, mental, or physical. Yeah. So in reality, that means like I think a certain way. If someone says, oh, I agree with you, or I understand the way you think, or, gives you some positive feedback about that, that's an affirmation. That's being validated. Externally validated. Yeah.
I always make the distinction between external and internal. I think it's a really important distinction because the average person is exactly how this whole conversation started with Simon and the person he was interviewing on his podcast, is most people seek validation externally from others. Yeah. And then to your description.
Yeah. So they talked about how the way you maybe seek validation or validate others is an important human skill.
Yeah.
I like that wrapper. It's a skill.
Yeah,
like it's not just it's a thing you can work on. It's a thing you can improve. It's a thing you can help other people with.
Yeah, I love it
frame.
Too. Yeah, he called it a great human skill. And I was like, God, that is so good. I mean, there's a lot of things that are really good human skills that we don't spend too much time polishing up often.
So why do you think with this idea of seeking validation, why do you think we seek validation? Like I walk around and I put a really nice outfit on today. And I'm just like, oh, I hope someone comments about how fashionable I look today.
Is that an eggplant shirt you're wearing? I'm just going to give you my perspective, whether it's right or wrong, and I'd love to hear yours too. I think the reason that people seek validation from others is a couple of things. One, and we say this often during the self-awareness journey, is we are tribal people. We don't exist alone. We have to be with a tribe or with our people. Human beings are not single animals. They need to be with others. And I think that is a way that they connect. They feel that is the way is through association by people saying, you fit in. Oh, I like your shirt. You fit in. Oh, I like your idea about that. You fit in. I really think that's a huge driver. And then I think the second reason is because as babies and children, we were conditioned to do as we were told. If you want to be a good girl or a good little boy, you'll do what we told you. And when you do, you get hugely validated. Oh, good job. You made your bed. Oh, good job. You finished your food. Oh, good job. You didn't start a fight with your brother. You didn't make a ruckus. You kept quiet. There's so many layers of that, but we grew up thinking that we had to act somewhat outside of our own position to be validated that we were not wrong and that we did fit in.
So that goes back to that root of acceptance.
Exactly.
It's like that's how the human race and the human tribe survives, is through acceptance. And if you were in the jungle by yourself as a young adult, as a baby, you wouldn't make it.
Right.
It was like a survival instinct.
Yeah.
I was going to say self.
What do you think?
Well, I was going to say we seek it because we want more confidence. It helps us with our confidence.
Yeah.
Because if I'm not feeling super confident about something, like I don't know if I can do something, or I would look for someone else to like help me become more confident. But now that I say that, maybe that's partly true.
I think that is definitely a component in why people do what they do. I mean, you think about it. If you start a new job,
I don't want to be wrong. Like, I don't want to be wrong, so I'm seeking other people's opinion to help make sure I made a right decision or I'm doing the right thing.
Right. I think that when we're developing something new, it's really normal to do that. And I don't know whether that's wrong or right. You start a new job, you need somebody to tell you if you're doing the right thing so you don't get fired, so you can excel in your role. I mean, I think there's certain places in our lives where we do need that feedback loop. But I think there's a departure of when that's no longer healthy, or maybe that sounds too judgmental, so I'll say helpful.
Yeah.
When we go too heavily relying on someone telling us they think we're doing a good job, we stop or don't begin to rely on ourselves.
Yeah. So I think we all probably know people who need a lot of validation.
Yeah.
And sometimes I kind of find it annoying, frankly. I mean, it's just like, why does this person need so much validation on what they're doing? They're just like spinning constantly and second guessing themselves and not making decisions, and they just have such wheel spin all the time. And they appear to me to be stuck. And validation helps them get a little bit of traction, but their kind of like default is like stuck.
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting that you say that, because one of the things I've been really practicing over the last few years is objectivity when I see it. It's because, and it's a little easier for me because I'm, an executive coach, and I'm interacting with people from an extended lens. I'm not with them every day doing the things, like I'm we're talking about things, we break them down, and then they go off and they practice, or they see things a certain way, right?
You get a lot of practice implementing some of these techniques.
Exactly.
Like in your job.
Yes, I do.
In bite-sized chunks.
Yeah. And sometimes the bite-sized chunks are like the size of a Volkswagen, coming at you. But I think here's another way to think about it. Another way to think about when you experience people seeking external validation is to see them as the reason that that's happening is because either they lack the awareness that they are not validating themselves, or they've never done it because they've never been really put in a position where they could initiate their own validation. So they naturally go back to what they've always known because they're not thinking about it like that.
Yeah. So talk about that. What is self-validation?
Yeah. I feel like, again, this is just from my coaching lens, and I'm not, I don't consider myself an expert. It's just somebody, I talk about it a lot more than the average person, but it doesn't put me in that expertise. But I think self-validation means that we are able to self-soothe. We are able to see when something and feel when something isn't right for us. We didn't do the best job that we could in a situation. We didn't handle a relationship in the best way that we had the potential to. So this is not judging ourselves for what we don't have. It's rather not recognizing what we do have and making ourselves feel good about what we have. We oftentimes put ourselves away in places where that is so unfortunate. I see a lot of leaders do this, where they think the way to show leadership is to put their own strengths away sometimes in the effort of trying to uplift others or amplify others' leadership. Yet when they do that, then oftentimes they are not able to even validate themselves. So that's when things can go sideways a little bit. So it's the difference between feeling good about your actions and your beliefs because you know it's right for you versus feeling good about your actions and beliefs because somebody else told you to. And what's funny is, making that distinction between the two, it's a huge distinction. It's a huge, huge, huge thing. And I think our whole lives, we do bounce back and forth. But here's the thing, when we start to focus on validating for ourselves, we no longer need the validation of others. But the funny thing is that when you start to do that, practice more self-validation, you start getting tons of validation from others and you no longer care.
I think we had a conversation once about receiving praise. And it kind of seems like that's kind of in the same vein. For me, I don't like receiving praise. It makes me kind of uncomfortable. I wonder if those are related a little bit.
Well,
you said
maybe, yeah.
You said self-soothing, which I think is a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
Because if you think of a baby, we're all babies. But if you had, your own child or cared for babies, they will cry and scream and they will need something hungry, changed, tired, right? They'll need something. And then the way they get calmed down is with their parent. They need almost like the aid of their parent, a caregiver, to calm their emotion back down.
Right.
So that they can, go to sleep or they can do whatever's next.
That's a good example.
And there are studies around kids that didn't get that parental interaction as babies and how they really struggle as adults getting their emotions to come back down because they never figured out how to self-soothe.
Right. Yeah.
They never got that soothing action, so they never figured out how to do it on their own without their parent.
Yeah. So if you think about what's required to get to that level, it's such a good example, JJ, because if an infant has no idea that they have these needs, but those around them do, those around them are going to validate those needs by caring for them, right?
Yep.
But what an interesting thing, because as that baby matures and starts to develop more cognitively, then suddenly that baby recognizes, oh, wait, when I cry, my caregiver will put a nook in my mouth. And I know what that nook is. And wait a minute, I think I can put it in my mouth.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we continue to develop through that. And it's through our relation with people that help us see how to do that. So, I mean, it's an excellent example that you're giving. It's a physical example, but it's the same thing, because we're learning the skills through the help of others to figure out how to care for ourselves. And then, and so at what point do you make that cognitive awareness shift that you start doing that with your own development of skills outside of yourself, like not the core basic skills, but other things that you need to help you excel in whatever your life, wherever your life takes you.
Yeah. So that's exactly what this conversation with Simon was about. And that was a really good description, because I watched this video and I was like, what exactly is he talking about? So they said specifically, instead of getting validation from others, give validation to others. And what you're implying there is this idea that if we shift, like, we all want validation. It feels good to be validated. I like being validated.
Yeah.
But instead of trying to seek it all the time, if you switch to giving validation to others, I bet you it helps with your own validation. You actually feel good when you help validate other people. And kind of in that context of helping others develop like a self-soothing technique, it would actually be quite a gift to other people to help validate their feelings.
I really like that. I had forgotten that he said that. But the only other thing that a little light went on for me when you started to say that, I think that by giving validation versus getting validation, it's helping you with one thing. It's helping you not focusing so much on self, on yourself, and doing actions expecting or seeking the validation and support of others because of your actions, because of your conscious decisions, right? And so moving away from that to focusing on other people by trying to give them that gift, I think is well-intended. But, and I will say but, normally I say but I'll say but. If you go overboard with that, or if it's not authentic, that is terribly unhelpful. In other words, you don't want to just constantly, and this is me pushing back on this notion just a little bit, you don't want to constantly give people validation if it's not authentic. Or if it's you working so hard in your own self to do something that you're not even really noticing the impact that you are having on that individual.
If you give someone that sort of feedback and you're not authentic, it comes across as like condescending.
Oh, I know.
Or like,
or terribly, terribly judgmental or sarcastic. Like, oh, you did such a good job on that project, when you don't think that they did, because you're trying in good faith to be validating, but you're not being completely honest. Right?
For sure. You definitely have to be careful with that. The other thing that I struggle with validation sometimes is validating someone's opinion or feelings doesn't mean that you have to agree with their feelings. But
I totally agree.
Conflate that all the time. Like, I conflate it. I say, if I validate this person's anger, then I should also be angry about the same thing they're angry about, but I'm usually not, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But that doesn't mean I shouldn't validate their feeling. But it's hard for me to make that I guess boundary or set a boundary where it's like, I can validate that feeling, but I don't have to agree with that feeling.
Yeah. You know what I think sits in the middle of all of this topic? Whew, it's a good thing that this is the Self-Awareness Journey podcast. I think what sits in the middle of all this is self-awareness. It's like doing the right things for the right reasons and because it feels good. I think we can get really good at validating other people if we are being authentic and we are seeing them. If we are seeing someone and we are saying things that are helpful and supportive for that person, not because of their actions, but because of their core being, and maybe their actions are showing something in that state, but really noticing someone for who they really are, that is hugely validating,
Yep.
and it might be catching them doing things that they weren't looking for validation on, or they weren't looking, it wasn't a public move that they did, but something very subtle. Like you saw them be kind to somebody. You heard them behave in a way that took some real energy because they could have acted some other way and didn't. Those core things, being able to recognize when people are showing their true human greatness is, and noticing that is what a huge validation for someone to notice it.
Yeah.
That's, I think, what the spirit of that conversation with Simon was intending towards,
Yeah. Well, and I think there's some deep parts of validation, and then there's some really easy, like everyday things that we can do to just like help be more connected. Because one of the ways that you really do build trust and deep connections is through like validating each other in a relationship.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's like we've talked about the deep human nature of acceptance and confidence and tribal connection. I think this idea is one of the key parts.
Yeah.
So
I was waiting for you to then say something about the Dr. Seuss dish pile. I don't know why that came to my mind, but I got the visual.
My eternal struggle with dishes.
No, you're right, though. It can be something very simple and doesn't have to be deep at all. Yeah. I totally agree with you.
So I got some ideas.
Oh,
about just how to put this into practice.
Oh, good.
Well,
I was so into the conversation, I never even thought of that.
You never thought about how you actually implement it. This is
exactly.
the JJ practical part of the podcast.
Okay, great. Let me get my pen.
Everyone get your notebook out. Well, one of the first things is by actually listening to people. So much of our interactions are us waiting till the other person stops talking so we can talk.
We're not really listening. Yeah, I agree.
So to me, like active listening or really engaged listening
that's so good. Yeah.
One of the keys to validating someone else. Like if they're talking and you're not even listening, like
what's the point?
What's the point?
Yeah.
You might as well be talking to the wall or the dog.
Yeah.
Actually, probably the dog's listening better than you are.
Only for their keywords, though, like snack, out, car ride.
That's why you and Amber love having dogs.
Exactly. It's a captive audience. Because
Mitch and I are not listening.
No, it's a captive audience. The only captive audience in the house.
Another one is empathy. We've talked about empathy. I've talked about how I think there's like an epidemic of lack of empathy in our society, and it's just really simple things like I see why you feel that way.
Yeah, exactly. I hear you.
Sounds hard.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah,
yeah. Those are good things to say.
So some really simple things there.
I have a couple too.
All right, you want to go?
Yeah, I'll say one.
You got one?
Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt your list.
Go for it.
I understand the lists are important. Try to be objective. When you see or hear someone behaving in a certain way, can you look at that through the lens of objectivity instead of your own personal experience and trying to frame it in the way you think it should be? Just being objective.
Is that like not being judgmental?
Yeah.
Same thing. Like,
yeah. Yeah, it could be the same thing. It's probably up on the same coin. I don't know if it's on both sides, right? I think that being objective is just an act and it's something that you learn in all situations, where judgment, I think, is easier to flare up in certain situations, where objectivity, I think, is a practice skill. It's not removing something, it's amplifying something that you think.
Or just it's like observing things as they are.
Yes, exactly.
Or trying
said.
to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We should talk sometime about like creating shared reality, because when you talk about objectivity, it's like I see things one way, you see things one way, and in the middle of those two, are they the same or are they different?
It's probably truth somewhere right in the middle.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other way you could validate would be just by like summarizing what someone says to you. You know, they just unload a whole huge thing onto you, and if you can just paraphrase that back in a few words, shows that you were listening, that you're thinking about what they're saying, that you care.
Yeah.
That's a really great technique to help form that bond.
Yeah. Excellent. Those are great.
Do you have more? I want to give you space.
Yeah, no, I do. I do. The other thing that I always say, and you've heard me say it 10 times, is to assume goodwill. I think that's a really good practice when you're seeing people bumbling through things, trying to do their best, sometimes with better result than the other. But assume goodwill. They're doing the best that they can in the moment. You know what? They're using everything that they've got in that moment. And whether you think that that's good enough or not is really immaterial.
Yeah.
So
that's
assume
good.
goodwill.
A lot of times when we're really emotional, those are not real positive emotions.
No,
right?
Totally
a lot
not.
of times we're emoting out and they're negative because we're not feeling good.
Right. Right.
So how do you help the other person through that?
Right.
Kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
And, just hearing them and assuming that their negative thoughts aren't what they're actually going to do. They're just trying to process through the negative, and you know that there's positive on the other side.
Yeah, and their negative thoughts are not based on you. They're just in their own process. That's really good.
Yeah. I think like encouraging people to talk about their feelings. That's another good way to help validate people, is like try to get their feelings out.
Yeah.
You probably
and again,
do that.
not take that personally.
In your coaching, that's probably most of your job is like, let's just try to get your feelings out. So then you can talk about them.
Well, to that point, I can't tell you how many people are not even actually sure
about what their feelings are. Yeah.
They're having a reaction, but they're not exactly sure where it came from. Or they'll know a specific thing, but when you ask what are your feelings around it, they're not. They're not used to thinking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this is quite a conversation. This is great. What a good suggestion.
A great conversation. Yes. Thank you, listener. We love it when people send stuff in. That's great. We love it. Keep it coming.
And it sounds like you mentioned it, and you mentioned a few, but I like this idea that there are some of these skills, some of these human skills that we can develop.
Yes.
Like we could probably come up with a whole list of skills like validation that we can work on with our partners, with our friends, with our loved ones.
With our coworkers.
All the time.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, there's so much further to go always. So, yeah, this is a great conversation. Makes me feel good.
Good job, Melissa.
Good job, JJ.
Did you enjoy this episode? Please go to your favorite podcast platform to subscribe, rate, and leave a review so others can discover it as well.
Growing self-awareness is a lifelong journey, and there's always further to go. And it's better when we're all in it together. Please think of someone you know who could benefit from hearing today's conversation and share this episode with them. We can't thank you enough for listening. Until next time, happy exploring, seekers.